Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to be unpacking the approach that I would recommend for your English paper 2 for IEB. So firstly, understanding the time frame and the mark allocations. We're dealing with a 3-hour paper for 100 marks. Question 1 is our Shakespeare essay, which I would recommend you take 5 minutes to plan, 50 minutes to write. Then you have your novel essay for question 2. Same story, 5 minutes planning, 50 minutes writing. Question 3 is your compulsory transactional writing, 5 minutes planning, 25 minutes writing. Question 4 is your optional transactional writing, 5 minutes planning, 25 minutes writing, and then checking time for 10 minutes. So one of my key tips for this paper is planning, and it is absolutely essential. Even in your reading time, you should be starting to think of how your essay is going to turn out. Please watch my videos on literature essays so that you can understand the process of planning. With IEB, they tend to give you some obscure, enigmatic, puzzling quote, and often the topics themselves are actually quite long-winded, and so people sort of freak out, or they think, oh shoot, I only have 3 hours, let me just start writing straight away. I would highly recommend that you don't do that. Give yourself the time in reading time, give yourself the 5 minutes before you start writing each of those essays to unpack the topic, to understand what the topic is trying to say, what is the question that they're asking. And once you've figured out that question, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to pick out the relevant information from your literature to actually utilize in that essay. So please take the time to plan and practice it before you write the exam, that 5 minutes planning and then 50 minutes to actually write the essay. Because in my experience, when I have the planning next to me, and I always do my planning on my question paper, but you can do it in your answer script as well. Just remember to cross it out afterwards. But if you have your planning, then you literally have a framework, and all you have to do is then go ahead and write in full sentences. And that planning is also going to help you, because if you watch my literature essay skills video, you'll see in the introduction you have to have a very clear idea of what you're going to be saying, because you need to have your 3 points in that introduction itself. So that planning is going to be absolutely critical. And then for the transactional writing, maybe you don't need the full 5 minutes of planning, but I do think it's helpful to plan because it has its own set of expectations, and it is mostly in an essay format. And so understanding what you're going to be putting in your intro, in your body paragraphs, and your conclusion is significant. That checking time is crucial because in this paper, all the spelling and the punctuation and the sentence structure, it all counts as part of the rubrics that are used to assess these pieces of writing. So please ensure that you go back, you reread your text very carefully, and you add a comma here, take away a comma there, make sure your spelling's correct, etc. So I've spoken a little bit about it already, but let's talk about literature essays, because you have 2 of those, 30 marks each. So as I said, planning is absolutely critical. Make sure you plan out your different paragraphs so you understand what your argument is. And before even planning out my paragraphs, I would decide what the topic is about, and I would literally write out my argument on my page, on my question paper, so that I understand exactly what I'm writing, what I'm trying to prove. Once again, if it sounds obscure, go check out that other video where I explain what I mean by argument. Make sure your argument is clear in every single paragraph that you're writing. That's significant. And just going back to planning for a second, your quotes, which you've obviously been studying, write those down beforehand. So have them next to you on your question paper, and then as you're writing your paragraph, you will notice where it is suitable to integrate those quotes. What it also does is, writing your quotes down, it clears up your brain space so that you're not thinking of remembering those quotes. You have them down on the paper, now you just have to integrate them. Remember your style. You can score big marks with style, or you could lose a lot of marks because of style. So make sure, contractions, don't use contractions, don't use the first person, use formal language, subject, verb, object, use the present tense. Try and integrate your quotes as far as possible. Be confident and assertive in your response. Don't say this may happen, or don't be hypothetical in any way. Make sure you stick to the point, you provide your evidence, you link, you back up everything that you say. Moving on to transactional writing, and here you have 2 20-mark questions. I think a lot of people focus on that literature essay and they sort of think the transactional is irrelevant, but it's 40% of this paper, so it is really significant, and it is a lot easier to score better on the transactional, to score well on the transactional than on the literature essays. So really don't discard this. This paper I would definitely go in order for. Do your Shakespeare essay, do your novel essay, and then only look at your transactional writing. So with transactional writing, you need to have a clear shift that happens in your brain from the literature essays to the transactional writing. And that shift is your intention and your purpose of writing these. So a literature essay is very academic. Your intention is to argue a particular point in a very academic, sort of objective manner, and distanced manner. Whereas transactional writing, this is the one time in IEB English where we actually want to hear your own voice. We want to hear your personal voice, your personal opinions on current affairs. We want to see your critical thinking, and we want you to show that it's your thinking. So we want the I, me, my. We want you to be telling us what you think about the world. So it's very different to literature essays. So really make that distinction in your brain as you shift over from the essay to the transactional writing. Remember your 6 formats that you need to know, and then importantly, this is quite similar to summary actually in paper 1, but remember your intention and your audience, because that is critical to understanding the expectation of a transactional writing piece. So if you're writing a speech for your fellow grade 12s, then it's going to be a lot more informal. If, however, you are writing an open letter to the president, then it needs to be very formal, and it needs to be very, methodical in how it's laid out. So remember that you're still writing an academic paper, you're still an English paper, so you can't go too informal, you can't go too crazy with that. But the markers are looking for, has the student really grasped, okay, this is a blog post? Have they grasped that it's supposed to be somewhat informal? Have they grasped the audience that they're catering to? Are they providing decent study tips for a grade 8, or are they providing study tips that are geared towards adult learners? Does it actually make sense but within this particular audience and topic? So keep that in mind. Remember that prompt that they give you, the passage, looks like a comprehension text or article. Remember that it's just for inspiration. This is not a reading paper. This is called your writing paper. You do not have to use that. Please do not quote from that. It is just for inspiration. Let's say your topic's on rhino poaching and you don't know anything about it. That little extract is supposed to just give you a taste for what it's about. So it's just supposed to inspire you and get you thinking, and sometimes you have to write in response to that article, but you do not have to quote from it, and you do not have to worry too much about it. Definitely read it, but remember, I want to hear personal voice, so I don't want to just hear what the text is saying. Some general advice is go through some past papers. I know that they change the set works, every couple of years, but go back and see if there are any on the IEB website. You can also look at the supplementary papers. And the transactional writing ones, those are really good as well, because you can just see the types of questions that they ask and the topics that you should be aware of. So if you can find your set work, like the Tempest was tested last year, brilliant, go have a look at that, see if you can unpack that. And if you don't have time to write a full essay, just try it in your head, and even on paper, try and plan out that essay. How would you argue it? What would you argue? What quotes would you use to back up your perspective? And also, I'm sure that your teachers gave you some extra essay topics for the new set works that you are studying. Go back to your prelim papers, your June papers, even if you don't have your actual essay, but you have your question papers. Go back, try and plan that, try and see if you're ready, and get into the zone of thinking critically under time conditions. Studying. The general misconception about English is not a studying subject. You need to study your content, you need to study your quotes, you need to be aware of all your characters, all the storylines, all the quotes that you need to be integrating. So watch my video to figure out which quotes you need to be studying to integrate them appropriately. Remember your mindset in the examination. Just like paper 1, you are getting unseen texts or unseen topics presented at you within a time limit, so you really need to have this critical mindset in the exam Don't freak out when you see the essay topics and it looks complicated. Take a highlighter, take a pencil, circle the keywords, try to understand what's going on. What are they asking you? Write it in your own words, come up with your argument. But you can only do that if you have a positive mindset. And remember, with essays, we don't want to read an essay that's not sure of itself. We want to read an essay that is incredibly sure of itself, that has a clear argument and a clear understanding of where it's going and what needs to be done. So even if you're not feeling it, fake it till you make it. Act confident, act assertive, write assertively, write confidently. And lastly, focus on the intentions of each task. So a literature essay is to present a critical argument. Transactional writing is to showcase your personal voice within an academic way. So make sure you understand that intention. You know, in paper 1 we spoke about the intention of each text and analyzing it. Now you're actually writing the text, so you need to be aware of what your intention is. Is your intention to convince someone of something? Is your intention to inform someone of something? So keep that in mind. So wishing you the best of luck. I hope that you will find the paper to be maybe not easy, maybe it needs to be a little bit challenging, but doable. So good luck. Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking about literary essays, which are essentially essays that are based on literature, whether that be a Shakespeare play or a novel. So as always, you have to prepare before you go and write your exam. So I'm going to walk you through 5 of the main aspects of a play or a novel or any form of literature that I will focus on if I know that I have to write a literary essay in my exam. So number 1 is plot. Now this is pretty obvious, but you have to go through your text, go through summaries, revise your plot so that you know all the sequencing of all the events. Everything regarding plot is super important when it comes to writing anything about literature. The second thing is the character name. So oftentimes it's like, oh, that guy, the protagonist, yes, but you can only do that so much in your essay. You have to know every single character's name, so all the important characters. And another thing, especially with Shakespeare texts, is the spellings of the names can be a bit complicated. So I implore you to, before your exam, go check the character list at the beginning of the novel or at the beginning of the play and just study those spellings. Also remember, you can't just know the characters' names, you got to know how they relate to the plot. The third thing, which takes a little bit of time, is themes, because this has to do with the analysis of the text. Yes, so you need to go through the text and see what sort of themes crop up. Is it war? Is it love? Is it peace? Is it conflict? All of these different themes you need to analyze and be able to write decent essays on, because it is likely that your literary essay topic will be based on a character or based on a theme. The fourth thing to remember to revise is quotes. So I recommend that you keep a notebook which you fill up with all different meaningful short quotes that you find throughout the text, because it will add so much credibility to your essay if you are able to quote directly from the text. And number 5 is vocabulary, and this is an important thing to have in every single aspect of the English exam, but specifically for literary essays, because you can do so much preparation for them. So go through your text, go through your characters, see, okay, maybe this character is brave. So now go find some synonyms for brave, so that if you ever get an essay question on that specific character, you're not just saying Tom is brave, Tom is very brave. You can say different things using different vocabulary and different synonyms. So now that you've done all that preparation, the day of the exam arrives, and now you need to know what you need to do in order to get those maximum marks. So the first thing that I would highly recommend is planning. Lots of people overlook this. So as soon as they get the exam paper, they just like start writing. I would definitely recommend that you plan. So my belief is if you take 5 minutes to plan, it'll actually save you time later on, because what typically happens if you just start writing without a plan is that you forget what you've written before, you forget what facts you've used, you don't have an argument, so then you take loads of time going back and trying to find out what you were actually trying to say. So an important thing here is not to take too much time, yeah? So I would say 5 to 10 minutes maximum you need to take to plan your essay. So once you have the topic, you have to be thinking about it and you have to plan in a specific way. So while you're planning, these are some things that you need to keep in mind. You have to keep in mind the structure, right? So every single literary essay has to have an introduction and it has to have a conclusion. the body needs to comprise of 2 to 3 distinct paragraphs. And when I say distinct, I mean it needs to be based on a specific point. So I don't want you talking about the same thing in every single paragraph. It needs to obviously make sense as one cohesive essay. Yes, so you need to have 3 different points, 1 per paragraph. Then this points back to your preparation, but try and include at least 2 quotes per body paragraph. So sometimes, obviously, it is a bit tricky in an exam to remember all those quotes, but if you continually look at them every single day in the preparation leading up to the exam, then you are sure to remember them. And this is also why I think planning is so important. Get those quotes down on paper. You can just do it on the side of your question paper so that you don't have to keep remembering and trying to remember what they were. So just get them down as you get into the exam and you're allowed to start writing. And number 4, this is something that I always have to remind myself, is to only write what the question is asking. So sometimes you do so much preparation for a specific text and you just want to write everything down in 75 pages, all that you know about every single character and every single plot twist. But no, you have to only answer what the topic has asked you to answer. Okay, so now let's get into the actual planning. Now, this is a system that I have used since school and I still use when I write my English essays at university. It is such an amazing system and it is so helpful in planning and in getting your argument across in your essay. And this is the PEEL method. So PEEL stands for Point, Explain, Example, Link. So I'm going to explain that a bit more now. So for every single body paragraph, you need to have a specific point. What are you trying to say? You need to then explain that point in relation to the topic. So why is this point important? Then you need to give an example from the text. And this, I think, is what some people leave out, is they might just get too theoretical. Or alternatively, what people do is they just write about the example. They just tell me the story of the text. And that is not what you need to do in literary essays. So I'm going to show you an example later. But number 4, which is super important, is to link. So some people forget this. You need to be able, at the end of your paragraph, to do a sentence or two that links your whole paragraph to the point of the paragraph, and more importantly, to the point of the entire essay, to the topic itself. So this is how my planning tends to look before I write an essay. Obviously, it's not going to be all neat and tidy in an exam, but if you're going to do this as a preparation task before the exam, writing a practice essay, then definitely try and outline this, right? So you have your introduction, which you don't need a ton of planning for, and your conclusion, but then for every body paragraph, I'll put down my point, my explanation, my example, my link, and then some quotes that I'm going to include. So here's an example. So I've given a very simplistic topic. So this is the topic for the essay. Sarah is an exemplary role model to young girls, right? So the first thing I have to do is I have to come up with my 3 main points that I'm going to put in each of my paragraphs. So why is she an exemplary role model to young girls? Well, she's brave, she's intelligent, and she has good manners, right? So obviously your topics are not going to be as simplistic as this, but this illustrates it well. So now let's say I'm going to focus on the bravery element. Yes, so this is going to be my planning for that specific paragraph. So I'm going to say, okay, my point is that she's brave. Yes. Then I'm going to explain that. So I'm going to say bravery is an important quality for role models to portray, and it is a trait that young girls should aspire to attain. So obviously these are not in full sentences or anything of that sort, because this is just planning. But you see how I've tried to explain why I'm putting bravery. So it's not just random, okay, I'm talking about Sarah's bravery. No, it's bravery is an important quality for role models to portray, and that is why Sarah is an exemplary role model. So now my example. So this would be straight from the text. So I'm going to say she stands up to her bully and she isn't afraid to use her voice. Yes. So obviously yours is going to be a lot more detailed because you're going to know the text very well. This is just a random made up example. So you're going to give me an example that shows her bravery. And then lastly, you have to link it. So then now I'm linking it to the entire topic as a whole. So I'm saying Sarah's bravery characterizes her or categorizes her as an impeccable role model to young girls. Yes, so I've linked the point of my paragraph and my explanation to the the main topic of the essay. So I hope that you paid attention to that, because that is super important, because now we can move on to actually writing the essay. So it's actually quite funny, but when you write a literary essay, for me, so much more effort goes into the planning, into the actual writing. So now I want to talk about the introduction. So there is a sort of formula that you can follow that works perhaps 95% of the time. And so I encourage you to utilize this sort of formula in inverted commas to try and add structure and planning, or not planning, structure and cohesiveness to your essay. So I always like to start off in, and then the author's name, so like in Shakespeare's play, and then give a bit of context that is related to the topic that you have been asked. The next sentence, you have to rephrase the topic. Do not just merely repeat the topic. You got to rephrase it and set out your argument. So if it was like Sarah is an exemplary role model, then I would set out my argument that said Sarah is an amazing role model to young girls. Yes, so I'm going to tell you my point of view from the get-go. Don't leave me in suspense. From reading your introduction, your marker should know exactly what your argument is going to be. The third sentence is going to be you giving your 2 or 3 main points in summary. So that is why planning is so important, because as soon as you write the introduction, you actually have to know what you're going to say. So this would be from our example earlier, like the bravery and the intelligence and the good manners. Yes, so I'm going to summarize that into 1 or 2 sentences so that the reader or the marker knows what is coming. And lastly is the linking or concluding sentence. So I'm going to sum it all up, but I'm going to get going with my essay now. So with regard to the body, we've spoken a lot about the body in our planning, and this is really helpful because now when you actually have to get to writing it, you just have to focus on your sentence structure and your vocabulary. If you follow the Peel method, like I've shown you with the planning, then it's super easy to just take all that information, take all the quotes and just integrate it into well-constructed sentences. And then moving on to the conclusion. In the conclusion, there are 3 things that you need to make sure that you include. So, number 1, you got to restate your argument. Yes, so constantly restate it. Think of yourself as a lawyer. Yes, so you are constantly reinforcing the whole time what your argument is, that this man is innocent, for example. You also have to remember to list your points again, and this is why vocabulary is so important and why I put vocabulary and synonyms in at the bottom of the slide in capital letters, because you have to know how to change up the words that you're using so it doesn't sound super repetitive and boring. And thirdly, you must remember to put a concluding reinforcement of your point of view. So yeah, vocabulary and synonyms, I cannot emphasize that enough. And with regard to literary essays, you can definitely plan for that by making, by using the dictionary in your planning notes, in your summaries, and by researching your characters and finding different words to use to describe them. Okay, so now there's some general tips. So the first one is check out rubrics in advance. So no matter what syllabus you're doing, you can go online and you can literally Google it, and you'll find for every single paper you'll find a rubric for the essay, so you can see exactly what they are looking for. Another thing which I did mention slightly before, but I'm going to re-mention it because it's super important, is to read the question. So read the topic and make sure you follow the word count and don't start talking about something that is completely unrelated, because that is very easy to do. The next thing is formal language. So yeah, this is pretty obvious, but some people seem to forget it. So you can't use like I've been saying this entire video. No contractions, no slang. This is an academic piece, so please don't use like I or me or my. No contractions, which is like can't, rather say cannot, and definitely no slang ever. Punctuation is also super important, so some people may forget this, and I'm often appalled at some of the punctuation of certain students, even in matric or in grade 10 or in 11, so please make sure to pay careful attention to punctuation. Don't make your sentences too long, make sure you have a full stop in there, no comma splices allowed. Linking to punctuation is you hopefully going to be including a lot of quotes, and that means that you need to have inverted commas for these quotations. Yes, don't just put a quote in as your own words, definitely make sure that you use inverted commas. Next thing is you have to underline the play or the novel title. So some teachers prefer it underlined, some teachers prefer it in inverted commas. Whatever their preference, you just have to find out, or otherwise my preference is underlining it because I think it's easier. So definitely make sure that you differentiate between the actual play and your writing. And this is especially important in a play like Hamlet, where Hamlet is the name of the protagonist and it also is the play. So you have to make sure that you underline the play or the novel title. Next thing is to integrate your quotes. So when I say like use quotation, some people will be like, as this character said, dash, and then they do their quotation. No, you must integrate your quotes into your sentences. So if, for example, Sarah is brave, and I can put brave in inverted commas because that may be an actual direct quote. Yes, obviously yours will be longer. So, but it's integrated into my sentence. It's not just randomly standing there, and it's not like she said this, he said that. Yeah. All right, vocabulary, we've already discussed it. So try and vary that as much as you can. Another thing is to practice and ask your teacher to mark it. So some people are under the impression that their teacher do not want to help them, that they're lazy perhaps, I'm not sure. But definitely write essays, send it to your teacher. I'm sure, in my experience, teachers have always been super happy to mark it because it shows that you're really putting in effort and you're really trying. And if you have a tutor, definitely submit them like 5 million different essays to check because their feedback is going to be so important to help you improve. Right, we're almost done. Another thing is to limit your time beforehand. So in an exam, obviously, you're not just going to have one literary essay to write. So make sure that you tell yourself, okay, I'm going to spend 5 minutes on planning and then 40 minutes to finish this essay. And try and keep to that as much as possible. Also try and use this in your preparation, right? So when you're writing your practice essays to submit to your teacher, make sure you set a timer. Try limit your time. See where you're going wrong. Are you taking too long in planning? Are you taking too long in your introduction? So make sure that you limit your time so that in the exam, you're going to be all set. And then finally, try to proofread. So I would not recommend that you proofread during an exam straight after you've done your literary essay. I would recommend after everything in the entire paper is completed, go back to your literary essays and proofread it. Cross out any unnecessary words perhaps, put in some punctuation marks, and yeah, just carefully read it through. So I hope that you enjoyed that video and that you learned something, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now. Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video we're going to be discussing how to select and integrate quotes when writing your literature or literary essays. Now I have made a whole video on literature essays, but I'm going to focus specifically on this skill with regard to literature essays because it is one of those make it or break it skills. If you're able to integrate your quotes, you have a much better chance of achieving within the next simple band. So first we need to understand, why am I expected to quote? And if you go back to that literature essay video, that skills video that I made, I think it was about 2 years ago now, you can actually understand that the entire point of a literature essay is to prove an argument. And so if you're going to provide a quote from the text, from the literature that you're actually discussing, you are going to be emphasizing your argument and reinforcing your argument and making your argument more credible. And so that's why it is really important to quote, and it is an expectation. Your marker is looking to see that you have read the text thoroughly, and that you've critically analyzed it and that you've engaged with it. We don't want to see an essay where it doesn't even look like you've read the text or that you've made the effort to actually go and study some of the important parts of it. So my advice would be to aim for 2 quotes per body paragraph. So if you're an IEB student, you are typically going to be writing an essay with 3 body paragraphs, which means you need around 6 quotes in your essay. If you're a DBA student, maybe you're writing 2 body paragraphs, and so therefore you need around 4 quotes. Now the minimum I would say is 1 quote per paragraph, but if you can do 2, then it's so much better. So before the exam, you need to ensure that you are studying the correct quotes, and this comes into this preparation aspect of it. Remember, you can't just show up, you sort of know the play, and then you're going to make up the quotes on the spot. The quotes have to be legitimate, and trust me, your teacher will know because they have read the text many times. So you need to study quotes which are suitable to prove a variety of themes and characters. So you don't want to go and study a quote that is very obscure, that only relates to one particular theme or one particular character, because then you're going to land up studying a whole bunch of quotes, maybe like 50 quotes, which is obviously too difficult to study all of them accurately. So you need to ensure that you are selecting your quotes very carefully. So you want to select a quote that tells you a lot about a character, but also tells you a lot about a theme. And in that way, that quote is a good investment of your time to study. You must use quotes between 5 to 7 words. You don't want to go learn an entire paragraph off by heart. And some teachers don't like when you quote just one word. Some teachers don't mind it, but other teachers prefer if you quote something of substance. So my suggestion would be don't just quote one word, because there are those markers who don't like that. Rather quote something of substance. And what I mean by that is, it mustn't be a quote that just uses, normal everyday language, the way that you would describe something, right? Because that could just be a description that you can just use in your explanation. It must be a quote that is really meaningful, that has very strong diction, that tells you a lot about that character or that theme in a very particular way. The next thing is to study quotes with limited pronouns and or obvious tenses to avoid overusing square brackets. So I think there is a little bit of a tendency, once students learn about square brackets, that they use them all the time, right? So square brackets are when you want to slightly adjust a quote and you want to make it a different tense, or you want to adjust the pronoun so it flows in the sentence and it's integrated. But if you use too many of those, it actually defeats the whole point of using a quote, because you're using more of your own words than the quote itself. So you need to be very careful in the selection of quotes. And this slide is basically just talking about that selection of quotes to ensure that you're not studying quotes that have a whole bunch of pronouns and a whole bunch of references to the past tense, because it's going to be more difficult to integrate that into your argument or into your paragraph. So understanding what quotes to learn, that's the first step. And some people like to write out these quotes on a list, which I think is a really good idea. Some people like to highlight it in their book so they can see the context that it's in. Either one works, as long as you know that you have a list of, let's say, like 10 to 20 quotes in your head when you go into that exam. Remember as well, and it's something I'm going to talk about, and I do talk about this in the literature videos, is that your quotes, even though they're said by a particular character, it doesn't always have to prove something about that character. So character A can say something about character B, and you can use that quote to elucidate your argument about character B. Also remember that quotes are not necessarily said. Obviously in a play it's all said, it's all dialogue, but in a novel it can just be a description. It doesn't actually have to be the words that someone says. So moving on to actually integrating your quotes. So you need to ensure that this is done really skillfully. You don't want to see in an essay when you're marking it, and you don't want to write it, "This quote shows," or I've seen a lot of essays where people just put the quote as a sentence and then they say, "This indicates that." No, definitely not. We do not want to see that. We want to see the quotes being a part of that paragraph, a part of what you're saying. So you need to ask yourself, is my selected quote relevant to the point of my paragraph? Is this quote actually doing what it's intended to do in terms of proving my argument, or am I just using a quote for the sake of using a quote? Obviously, we want to ensure that this quote is relevant, that it proves a specific point. And that's why I said you should try and find quotes related to themes and characters and define them in your head. This proves this about this character, this proves this about this theme. Because in the essay topics are usually centered around themes and characters, or themes or characters. So make sure that you select a quote that is really important to relaying that particular point, that it is relevant to what you're saying, and that it's a quote of substance. And then the big question: if I read this sentence aloud, would it be obvious that there was a quote from the play that made an appearance in the sentence? This is an important question regarding the extent to which your quote is integrated. So an integrated quote means that you can read it as part of the sentence, and if I read it aloud to someone, they wouldn't even know it was a quote because they wouldn't be able to see the inverted commas. So make sure that when you are writing your quotes in there, that you have integrated it in such a way that you can just read it aloud and it would flow smoothly, right? So it obviously still has to be a quote of substance, and maybe the language would give it away that this is a quote, but the sentence must flow. I don't want to see "he said this" or "this shows that." It must be a part of the sentence. I hope that was helpful. I'll see you in the next video. Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video, we are going to be looking at some important quotes from Shakespeare's The Tempest. Please make sure you watch my other videos on literature essay skills, as well as the one about how to integrate quotes in an essay. So this video is just a review of important quotes, so I'm assuming you have already studied the character traits of the plot line, etc., and we're just looking at quotes in this video. I've separated the quotes by the character who said them, which is not necessarily the way that it needs to be in your essay, right? Because character A can say something about character B, and you can use that quote to prove something about character B, but just in terms of organization, I've organized it by who said this quote. So whenever you're looking at quotes, you must always try and look for ones that have like the least amount of pronouns, the least amount of past tense, and you also want to try and make sure that they're short, that they're around 5 to 7 words. That's a good sort of sense of a quote, and that they link to many different themes and characters. So there's no harm done. That's a good quote if you want to prove that Prospero is a good person, because despite his plan to seek revenge on the nobles, the shipwreck does not cause them any long-lasting harm. If you go further down, wrapped in secret studies, so that's a really nice one because it doesn't have any pronouns, and it just shows how he neglected his duties as the duke in the past. Thus neglecting worldly ends, all dedicated to the closeness and bettering of my mind. So he abandoned his dukedom, he abandoned the people he was supposed to be serving, and he was wrapped in his secret studies. If we go down, hath mine enemies brought to the shore, and actually just before that it's beautiful fortune, and that's the theme of fate versus free will, and he sees it as fate, as it just so happens that all these nobles who he wants to get revenge upon arrive miraculously at his shore, so then he can enact his revenge plan. When he's speaking about Ariel, he calls him my brave spirit, and then immediately when Ariel retorts, he says, malignant thing, hast thou forgot the foul which Sycorax. So that's a really important quote over there. It's a nice one because it has really strong words, so you can use like a malignant thing. She did confine thee into a cloven pine, with which rift imprisoned thou didst painfully remain a dozen years. So this is when Prospero reminds Ariel of his imprisonment. So if you ever want to prove Prospero's terrible traits, then you definitely talk about his treatment of Caliban and Ariel. Then here's a good quote about Caliban: not honored with human shape, or thou poisonous knave, thou shalt have cramps. So if you want to prove that Prospero is this terrible creature who is incredibly racist and manipulative and power hungry, then you must definitely use some of these quotes. Thou most lying slave, whose stripes may move not kindness. And then if we go to the next slide, over here, Act 4, a third of mine own life, he's speaking about Miranda here. He also calls her a rich gift, and so this relationship with Miranda is quite interesting because it seemed to be caring but also extremely sexist and controlling. And here is the very important quote: if thou dost break her virgin not. So that's what he says to Ferdinand about Miranda. A born devil, of whose nurture can never stick. So that's about Caliban. It's also quite a good quote. It's not too many pronouns or tenses. Thou shalt have the air of freedom. That's when he finally grants Ariel his freedom. Then one of the most famous quotes, and definitely one to study: the rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance. The reason why this is such an important quote to study is because usually a Tempest essay is going to include the transformation of the characters, and so when you have a transformation of a character, you always have to show what they were in the past and then what they become. And so Prospero, you can prove that he was self-obsessed, he was selfish, he was he wanted revenge, he was intent on getting revenge, and then ultimately he realizes that the rarer action is in virtue than in vengeance. Do you see how nicely you can integrate it into a sentence? Because He's rather going to forgive the nobles for what they've done. So that transformation is really significant, and you can talk about Prospero, a whole paragraph about him, with that transformation and how he goes from being selfish to being more understanding of other people and seeking forgiveness rather than conflict. And this is where he makes this big proclamation that he's going to abandon his magic to serve his kingdom and to do his duty. He says, I'll break my book, I'll break my staff, I'll drown my book. And then that's when he asks Alonso, he says, I require my dukedom of thee. And then ultimately, you know, that ambiguous ending, he says, set Caliban and his companions free, untie the spell. He sets Caliban free and he leaves the island. And there we have our big dilemma of whether this is, you know, does this redeem him at all? Is there some form of redemption for Prospero? And you can really argue either way, because ultimately Caliban wasn't his to free anyway. He shouldn't have had the power over him in the first place, but he does redeem him. He does free him at the end. And then the epilogue, which I think is just so clever, when he ends off and he says, as you from crimes would pardon me, let your indulgence set me free. He asks for forgiveness from the audience, and that's sort of the ultimate show of the fact that he's recognized he's done something wrong. Quote said by Caliban, so here, the island's mine, by Sycorax my mother, which thou takest from me, showed thee all the qualities of the isle. You do keep from me the rest of the isle. His art is of such power. So this is significant because obviously the island or the isle is Caliban's, and so here he proclaims that to Prospero, and we learn that when Prospero first came to the island, Caliban treated him really well and showed him around the island, and now Prospero has taken control over it. His art is of such power. That's significant because it shows how scared Caliban is of Prospero, because his magic is quite powerful. If we move on, by sorcery he got this isle. That's a really nice one about Prospero. And he also mentions that the isle is full of noises. He knows that Prospero is behind it, but he actually doesn't know about Ariel, and that's something significant as well. Prospero like keeps things from everyone, from Miranda and from Caliban. He keeps the knowledge of Ariel away from them. Alright, quote said by Ariel. Ariel's doing Prospero's bidding, so he says, I come to answer thy best pleasure, not a hair perished. This king's son I've landed by himself. There he's talking about Ferdinand, and remember, this is all showing that he is enacting Prospero's plan, but no one is actually injured. And then he reminds Prospero, my liberty, remember I have done thee worthy service, thou didst promise to bait me a full year. So he reminds him that he did promise him his liberty, but obviously Prospero only grants it to him right at the end of the play. Alright, Miranda. Now the thing with the Tempest is that, you know, you have a lot of characters, but ultimately there's not a ton to say about each of them. Well, that's in my opinion. And so you definitely have to have a paragraph on Prospero, and I think for Tempest you have to talk about the other characters in relation to Prospero, and I think Miranda is one where you can have a whole paragraph on Miranda and her relationship with Prospero, or Prospero's relationship with Miranda. The other one I would recommend would be Caliban, and sometimes when the essay calls for it, Alonso. But you see how you can't really just do an entire paragraph on Alonso. You need Prospero's relation with Alonso. So Miranda, she's very sweet, she's very naive, she's very innocent. And this is when she says, I have suffered with those that I still suffer. When she sees the shipwreck, she's like, I'm suffering with them. And then this is a really important quote to show her naivety and also to show her transformation. So if you want to show Miranda's transformation, she goes from being naive and ignorant to becoming more more knowledgeable about the world, and being sort of brave and courageous to leave the island, which she's known as home for her entire life, or most of her life. She says, more to know did never meddle with my thoughts. She didn't even think about the world beyond the isle. To Caliban, she says, 'tis a villain. Thy vile race. And then about Ferdinand, she says, it carries brave form. And then this is a nice quote. She says, this is the third man that I ever saw, the first I ever sighed for. So this is the third man I've seen in my life, the first one I've been attracted to. And then she defends Prospero to Ferdinand. She said, "My father's of a better nature, sir, than he appears by speech." So that's quite an interesting one, because thinking about what happens later on, you know, is Prospero such? Is he probably is, right? Because we see what happens at the end. He is of a better nature than he comes across. And then an important part of her transformation is that she takes responsibility for her life, and she says, "I am your wife if you will marry me." So she actually proposes to Ferdinand, and that shows she's taking on independence and this new role. And then Ferdinand, I wouldn't go and speak about Ferdinand in my essay unless I really had to. So he says, "My drowned father," and that's something to prove the cruelty of Prospero. He does separate Alonso and Ferdinand and makes each of them believe that the other is dead, which is quite cruel. And then he says to Miranda, "If a virgin in your affection not gone forth, I'll make you the Queen of Naples." This is like in their first meeting. He's completely taken with her. "But through my prison once a day, behold dismayed." So that's when Prospero decides that they need to be patient and they need to sort of work for the relationship. And he says it's all worth it if he can see Miranda. "The very instant that I saw you did my heart fly to your service." And he promises to Prospero, "Never melt mine honor into lust." So there you can see the sort of patriarchal understanding or patriarchal theme in the play. "I have received a second life," he says, and this is when he's about to, he sees Alonso has not died, and he is now going to board the ship with Miranda and leave the Isle and start their new life. So I hope that has been helpful. It's not, a plot of the Tempest or a character analysis, just some important quotes that I think will be helpful for your literature essays. So please remember to like the video if it was helpful and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video. Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video, we're going to be unpacking some of the key characters in The Handmaid's Tale, looking at some descriptions of them, but also some important quotes to include in your literary essays. So remember to go watch the videos on the skills required to write a literature essay, as well as the short video I did a few weeks back about how to integrate quotes into your literature essays, because that will be helpful as a premise to this content. So our first character is obviously Offred. She's our protagonist. We are hearing the story from her perspective, so she's the first person narrator. I obviously cannot go through everything in one video, so I'm just going to try and do the highlights of each character, especially Offred. There's so much to say about her. The dystopian events unfold through her eyes. She tells her story using numerous flashbacks and by directly addressing the reader. And so this creates suspense, but it also creates a sort of fractured reality, what emphasizes the fractured reality that Offred experiences. She is seemingly passive, but I would argue that she's quite resistant in her thoughts. And the big thing with Offred is the question of whether she is a resistor or whether she is an enabler of the society, whether she just gives in. And you can obviously argue either way, because that's the beauty of English, in that you can argue in whichever direction you choose, as long as you have substantiation, and you have substantiation for both. But I would certainly argue, while she seems to give in to the society, through her relationship with the commander, through not openly, or as we would expect, openly resisting, and we're going to discuss open resistance with Offred when we get to her, but she is extremely resistant in her mind, because she's supposed to be indoctrinated in her mind, but she does not lose sight of her sanity, unlike Janine, who loses her sanity and completely gives in to the society's demands. So I definitely would argue that she is resistant in her thoughts. She thinks things against this dystopian world, and she also keeps her memories close to heart. She doesn't forget about her loved ones in her past life. She still keeps that connection with her old life, and that's a form of resistance in this really hectic society. She is obviously the handmaid for Commander Fred and his wife, Serena Joy. She's haunted by her past. Her memories and her love keep her from losing her sanity. She has secret meetings with the commander where they play Scrabble and talk. She values his companionship to an extent. She has a strong attraction to Nick and sleeps with him at Serena's request. She has a somewhat ambiguous ending. It's suggested that she's taken from the commander's house by the resistance, but it appears that it's the members of the Eyes who take her away. So the thing with this novel is that there's a lot of ambiguity to it, and a lot of, not everything is clear cut, and so we have to come to terms with that and understand the ambiguity in its own right. So some important quotes relating to Offred: worthy vessel, that's obviously related to her role as a handmaid. And something really significant about this novel is you see all the different characters, and in this dystopian world, this dystopian society, they are all seen for just one aspect of their humanity, because that's what dystopia does. Dystopia takes this idealistic framework and it corrupts it in some way, and what you're left with is a loss of humanity, and we'll discuss this more in the themes video. But just something to remember, that each of these characters, you'll see like there's only one thing that's important by the society, one thing that's valued, and the rest of their humanity is not valued, is sort of criticized or put aside or ignored. The amount of unfilled time, the long parentheses of nothing, that's talking about all the boredom she has as this handmaid. She's not allowed to do anything. Holding out her arms to me, being carried away. So this is her haunting past, where her and Luke and their daughter try to escape. I would like to steal something from this room. It would make me feel that I have power. I want to be valued in ways that I am not. I want to be more than valuable. I repeat my former name, remind myself of what I could do once, how others saw me. I believe in the resistance as I believe there can be no light without shadow, or rather no shadow unless there's also light. And that's really significant, and we'll talk about it more when we get to themes. But this idea of no matter how restrictive a society is, there is still going to be a form of resistance. There will still always be that light. There will still always be a glimmer of hope. What I coveted were the shears. I didn't want to live my life on her terms. I envy the commander and his pen. It's one more thing I would like to steal. So this desire to steal something is this desire to have some sort of power, or even just to be seen, because as a handmaid, she's really not seen or noticed. And so I step up into the darkness within, or else the light. So there's that ambiguity again between, is it darkness, is it light? Is she being taken by the resistance or by the Eyes? I wish the story were different. I wish it were more civilized. I wish it showed me in a better light, if not happier, then at least more active, less hesitant, less distracted by trivia. That's a really important quote, and for those of you who have read The Great Gatsby, you'll know the whole dilemma about the first-person narrator and whether this narrator is reliable or not. We are obviously hearing this, and we have a framework for it in terms of there's a framing device that this is these are a series of tapes that we are listening to that Offred has recorded. We don't know exactly when she recorded it. We're assuming it's afterwards, so that maybe would give us an understanding that maybe it wasn't such a bad ending after all. But there's a lot of unknowns regarding the narration, but this sort of quote tells us that this is a clearly it's a catalog story, or it's been, I've lost the word now, I found the word, it's been curated for our ears. So as much as we want to believe everything Offred does, we also have to be understanding this is a first person narration, and we know ourselves, like when we tell a story, we can often tell it and it is we embellish it in some way. And so this quote can do two things. It can either show us, okay, this story may be flawed, it maybe didn't happen exactly like this, maybe it's just interpretation, or it could actually indicate to us this is actually quite truthful, because she's being truthful and she's saying, I wish I actually had done something more, I wish I didn't present me in this light. So it's a bit of a tangent. I don't think that asks such a complicated question, but Offred is a really fundamental character, and just like the Tempest, where I said that it's difficult to all these different characters, it's difficult to write whole paragraphs on them. I would definitely recommend that you look at each of these characters in relation to Offred. So you can have a paragraph on Offred, and then you can have a paragraph on like Offred and Commander Fred, Offred and Moira, etc. So Commander Fred, he's an important and powerful man in Gilead. He's married to Serena Joy. He conducts secret meetings with Offred under the claim to make her life more bearable. And he gifts her with illegal materials. And here are some nice quotes. He is something we don't have. He has the word. I'd like you to play Scrabble with me. If anyone asks, tell them you're an evening rental. So he's a really interesting character, and I think his whole relationship with Offred is up for debate, up for discussion. You can go either way and say either, you know, he was being honest and truthful and he just wanted to help her, or he was, you know, had some ulterior motive and he was exercising his power. What's important is this quote, if anyone asks, tell them you're an evening rental, and this is when he takes Offred to Jezebel's. And it's significant because you see that this theme of resistance, and even the society who's the people who the society is supposed to be serving, like Commander Fred and Serena Joy, they both do things that go against the society. But the thing is, they're not going to pay the repercussions. They're not going to have to pay for the consequences of this resistance that they do or that they enact. And who is on the chopping block? Offred's on the chopping block. These lower class people are on the chopping block for their actions against the government that's supposed to be serving them. I hope that makes sense. The next one is Serena Joy. She's a former television star. She's married to the commander. She busies herself with hobbies such as crafts and gardening, and she's quite condescending towards Offred. And a nice quote is, she was a malicious and vengeful woman. Now, she's a really interesting character because she acts as a foil to Offred. And as much as she is terribly mean and condescending to Offred, you also have to understand that she was once this person. She had a life, just like Offred. She had a completely different life before the regime took over. And she was this vital, lively television star. And now she's the sort of shell of her former self because she's unable to have a child, or she's been told she's unable to have a child. And that is significantly, you know, it's very, very much, you know, demotivates her, or it takes away a key aspect of her confidence because women in the society are deemed valuable by their ability to have children. And so just understanding Serena, you can obviously understand her in a very negative way, but you can also understand if you're going to be a little bit more sympathetic towards her. But importantly is that there's a transformation in that character as well, of what she was before the regime took over and what she is now. Moira, such an important character. I would definitely try and write a paragraph with Moira and Offred together, because I think she is she's a form of inspiration for Offred, but she also is a foil to her because we see her, she's definitely an embodiment of resistance. Offred's outspoken college friend, a fierce feminist and a resistor of the new ways of Gilead. She escapes from the Rachel and Leah Center and ends up working as a prostitute at Jezebel's. Offred is saddened by her story, as Moira seems to have accepted her entrapment and has not continued to openly strive for liberty. She's definitely a realist. And that ending where, you know, Offred turns back and says, I never saw her again, and she's very upset by Moira's loss of any sort of striving for her freedom again, is really quite depressing, and it really shows the effect of the regime and on society, how it can crush people. What's important with Moira as well is this is a character that Offred knows before the regime takes over and also after. So it's really, you can see the changing in their relationship. It mirrors the times. Friendships were suspicious, had a mechanical ability. She used to fix her own car, the minor things. Moira had a bad reputation. She is a cunning and dangerous woman. Moira had power now. She'd been set loose. She'd set herself loose. Moira was like an elevator with open sides. She made us dizzy. Already we were losing the taste for freedom. Already we were finding these walls secure. That's such a good quote. That's when she escapes from the Red Center, and Offred remarks about like all these girls, all these future handmaids looking at her like they had already started just to accept their lives and what they were going to be. And Moira is someone who refuses to do that. I don't know how she ended it, or even if she did, because I never saw her again. Alright, Offglen. Now, Offglen is Offred's shopping partner. She's part of the Mayday resistance. She kills herself to avoid capture, and she sort of acts as this companion to Offred, and she's almost replaceable because like a few days later there's a new Offglen. What's important about Offglen is to understand the resistance, because I think we're very judgmental of Offred and, you know, like, what did she really do? Yeah, what resistance did she actually form a part of? But her talks with Offglen, and when they're by Soul Scrolls and they're talking, I mean, it seems very trivial, but really, this is a big form of resistance. This is something exceptionally brave and courageous to do. It's very dangerous to even have these conversations. And so Offred is also another form of like inspiration for Offred in not just accepting the status quo, not just accepting what's expected, but trying to live within the society to protect yourself for survival, but also looking beyond. The Marthas are the dutiful servants of the noble families. Remember, everyone in the society has their place. If they don't have a place, they're sent elsewhere. And then you have Offred's mother, who is sent to the colonies. She is an outspoken feminist. Remember, this novel was written in the 1980s. So Offred's mother is a radical, outspoken feminist from the 60s and 70s, where the second wave of feminism was taking over the world. She's sent to the colonies after change of power, and this is the difference, I think, because there's a lot of similarities between Moira and Offred's mother in terms of them both being sort of feminists and radical and just outspoken, independent women. Moira still has the ability to have children. She's young, so she's taken to be trained as a handmaid, but Offred's mother, she's lost that one aspect of her use, in inverted commas, and so she's sent to the colonies. They don't want to deal with her, obviously, all of her thoughts and her political and radicalized nature. Well, I don't know if it's radical, but I think it's radical in this society, obviously, to have women have any sorts of rights whatsoever. And so she's sent to the colonies. And she has a lot of nice quotes. One of them are, "They aren't a pattern women, except they're better at fixing cars and playing football, just what we need for the improvement of the human race," right? And then here we have this when Moira and Offred meet up again at Jezebel's. Moira says that Offred's mother landed up in the colonies, and Offred's relationship with her mother is another one of those things that's sort of ambiguous. We don't know the full story. It's almost like her relationship with Luke. We're like conflicted as to or she's conflicted about it, but it is ultimately her mother, and she cares for her deeply. And she says, "I think of my mother sweeping up deadly toxins. I can't quite believe it. Surely her cockiness, her optimism and energy, her pizzazz will get her out of this. She will think of something." So you do see that Offred does appreciate her mother. She looks up to her. She's also a form of inspiration for her. She is someone like Moira who just manages to be independent and get things done. And I think Offred herself, maybe before the takeover as well, she's not as independent or confident as her mother and as Moira, but she has to sort of grow into that aspect of herself. That's just an opinion, though. Nick, he works as a driver and a gardener for Commander Fred and Serena Joy, and he's Offred's love interest. And from the beginning, one of the very first descriptions of him, his cab is tilted at a jaunty angle. Now, that may seem very trivial, but it's really important in a society where you have to conform, and any sort of little thing that you do that's out of place is cause for great concern. So that's sort of a little bit of foreshadowing that he's going to break the rules in some way. And Offred is taken by him, and he's taken by Offred. Luke. So Offred's husband before Handmaid dates, he cheated on his first wife with Offred. He's the father of Offred's daughter. Luke and their daughter haunt Offred's thoughts. Offred is unsure about what happens to him, whether he was killed, captured, or managed to escape, because remember, they tried to escape once the takeover occurred. We have a very ambiguous feeling towards Luke, very conflicted and ambivalent, because he is seen to, he had an affair, and sometimes the quotes like this one about patronizing Offred seem like this is not the greatest guy, but at the same time there is a lot of love between him and Offred thinks about him often, and she really, that's how she stays sane, is trying to think of him and the life that they had and their daughter. So definitely, I wouldn't argue it's all negative at all. I think it's definitely positive, and this relationship keeps her going. This quote comes when they take away the women's rights to have a bank account, and she's like worried, and he's like, "Don't worry, I'll just pay for everything." And she's like, "Already he's starting to patronize me." Then I thought, already you're starting to get paranoid. So that's just the beginning of the end, almost the beginning of the end of life as they knew it. So next up we have Aunt Lydia and Aunt Elizabeth. They are the ladies in charge of the Rachel and Leah Center. They undertake their roles of re-education extremely seriously. Aunt Lydia is the one who has most of the quotes. Aunt Elizabeth is obviously a part of the whole system, but Aunt Lydia seems to be the main player. They utilize violence and brutality. They have absolute and utter control over the women at the center. They teach a distorted version of Christianity. Alfred shares their disturbing teaching epigrams throughout the novel's flashbacks, so she recalls what they say, how they try to re-educate these women and what she thinks she's supposed to believe, or what she knows she's supposed to believe in this society. Aunt Lydia leads the salvaging, and Moira escapes in Aunt Elizabeth's clothes after disarming her. So this is really, these characters are really pivotal because you've turned women on women. So these are women who are teaching other women to sort of degrade themselves, or not to degrade themselves, but dehumanizing these women and making them only about their childbearing qualities and disregarding everything else about them. So it's really pertinent and really quite depressing, in my opinion. Why expect one woman to carry out all the functions necessary to the serene running of a household? It isn't reasonable or humane. Your daughters will have greater freedom. I just noticed the typo there with carry, it's a double R. And they've just, these, maybe it's not Aunt Lydia and Aunt Elizabeth, maybe they've been indoctrinated themselves, but they teach this belief that this is good for these women. These women should be living this life according to sort of the Handmaid's Guide, or how the society has deemed it appropriate for them to lead their lives by just focusing on childbearing, that it's more honorable, it's a way for them to sort of atone. What we're aiming for, says Aunt Lydia, is a spirit of camaraderie amongst women. We must all pull together. So it's really deep, deep, deep indoctrination, and it's very much about the role of women being different to the role of men, which if you think back in history, that's how it was, and in our current times we're trying to shift that, and then in this dystopian reality we go back to that idea of men and women being very, very much different. Janine, or Offred, a woman who attended the same training as Offred at the Rachel and Leah Center. She has a child as a handmaid, but it's revealed that the baby was not fathered by a commander, so that's obviously quite disgraceful. And she loses her sanity. So I always think of Offred as a resistor in terms of Janine, or in terms of Offred, because Offred keeps her sanity, which is really important, and it's her way of resisting their regime and the ideas that they are making her follow. Whereas you see the dangers of what the Rachel and Leah Center can do to someone. It can really degrade them and take away their humanity and their sanity. And lastly, we have the professor at the end, who is going through these tapes and who is analyzing it. So he analyzes and interprets the tapes of Offred's story in the future. He studies Offred's story as a true historical narrative, and he implores for Offred's tale to be understood rather than judged. So quite interestingly, this sort of approach to understanding Offred's story is quite similar to how historians today study, pieces of literature from other time periods, trying not to impart or embellish or see through the lens of modern society, but rather assess the historical narrative as it was in that time. So I mean, you can talk forever about this whole framing device within a framing device of how, what comment does that make on our society, in the sense that we don't put our own moral values onto history. So it's a whole other thing that could be unpacked, which I'm not going to do right now because I don't think it will be tested in that much detail. We must be cautious about passing moral judgment upon the Gileadan. Surely we have learned by now that such judgments are of necessity culture specific. Our job is not to censure, but to understand. I hope that video has been helpful. It's just the tip of the iceberg, just a brief recap of all these different characters and some important quotes for you to use. Please make sure to like the video and to subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next video. Hello and welcome to another Tri-tutors video. In today's video, we're going to be unpacking some of the key themes with regard to the Handmaid's Tale. Please make sure that you check out the characters video that I made earlier, because that video, in that video I've alluded to some of the key themes. Themes are really important to understand because they often form the basis for literature essays, and my advice would be is as we go through the themes, think about the characters that relate to these themes so that you have something to talk about and something to frame your argument with. So I've compiled a list of different themes or different ideas that come up in the text, and I've also provided some key quotes that you can use to substantiate any argument you make regarding these themes or key concepts. The first one compiles a whole bunch of different sort of concepts to do with context, the will of the many over the will of the few, dystopia, and the dangers of centralized power. So remember, dystopia is a utopia that has gone wrong in some regard. So it's meant to be this idealistic society where everyone has their place, but obviously it does not turn out that way. And a key aspect of dystopia, if you read a lot of dystopian novels, is you will see that there's this lack of humanity to the characters, that you're only seeing the characters or the people or human beings in one dimension for one aspect of their identity, and you don't realize them as a full, complete human being. We also see the dangers of centralized power in The Handmaid's Tale, and we see this divide between, is the government ruling for the will of the many or rather the will of the few? And often what they campaign to be is, for the will of the many and for the benefit of the many, but really it is only benefiting a small part of the society. What's dangerous in the hands of the multitude, he said, with what may or may not have been irony, is safe enough for those whose motives are beyond reproach. A rat in a maze is free to go anywhere as long as it stays inside the maze. In the past, this would have been trivial enough remark, a kind of scholarly speculation. Right now, it's treason. They suspended the Constitution. Newspapers were censored and some were closed down for security reasons. They've frozen them. Any account with an F on it instead of an M. All they needed to do was push a few buttons. We're cut off. Humanity is so adaptable, my mother would say. Truly amazing what people can get used to, as long as there are a few compensations. So really wonderful quotes over here. The idea that newspapers are censored, that the Constitution can be suspended, this just shows that humans can, really take on all this power, and centralized power can be extremely dangerous because with the press of a button you can deprive 50% of the population any sort of autonomy or respect at all. And the idea of freedom, governments will claim that their people have freedom, but you have, what is freedom? Is it freedom within a certain maze, within a certain set of boundaries? The loss of humanity. She could not walk for a week. It was the feet they do for the first offense. They didn't care what they did to your feet and hands, even if it was permanent. You can't have them taken out. Whatever it is must be carried to term. Most of the time they aren't needed at all. They're only allowed in if it can't be helped. Maybe it's about who can do what to whom and be forgiven for it. So the loss of humanity, which you can sort of equate these quotes with violence as well. The first few quotes talk about Moira's punishments for trying to escape the Red Center and what they do to her, and how there's absolutely a lack of humanity or respect for a human being. They will physically torture you. And remember, they don't care about the handmaid's feet and hands because it doesn't function to serve them in terms of their main purpose in life, which is to bear children. The fourth quote, you can't have them taken out, whatever must be carried to term. That has got to do with, if a handmaid does become pregnant, they are not allowed to, even if there's some sort of deformity or something wrong with the child, they have to carry the child to term. So we can notice the relevance of the story within today's climate. Most of the time they aren't needed at all. This was talking about the doctors who were standing outside when Janine was having a baby. They are not to be called in unless it's very, very dire. And this just shows the complete loss of humanity in a society. You're not even going to have doctors to help this woman give birth or to be there to check that she's going to be okay. There's these other laws that have, superseded this basic sense of humanity. Trust and betrayal. The moment of betrayal is the worst. The moment when you know beyond any doubt that you've been betrayed, that some other human being has wished you that much evil. So this is when Offred is thinking back to how her, Luke, and her daughter tried to escape, and how someone ratted them out, someone told on them, and they were, they were sort of captured and Well, we don't really know what happens to Luke and her daughter. We have an inkling what happens to her daughter. We don't know what happened to Luke, and Alfred is captured and taken to be trained as a handmaid. So that idea of trust and betrayal going hand in hand with trust. Love and companionship, it's a lack of love we die from. So there it was, out in the open. His wife didn't understand him. Something to fill the time. He occupies space. He is more than a shadow. To him, I'm not merely empty. What he wants is intimacy, but I can't give him that. So love and companionship is a really important theme because we need to look at the commander's relationship with Alfred and whether he is a true companion or not, and that's up for debate, and you can argue it either way. And I think it's something that Alfred does enjoy her time with the commander because it's a way to fill the time, because she's incredibly bored. She just has to sit in her room a lot of the time and absolutely do nothing, and so it's a way for her to fill the time and have some sort of connection with someone, because the only other person she really has a connection with is Afghan, but they have to sort of whisper under their breaths. And she makes those comments as lack of love we die from. And then that point of his wife didn't understand him, that shows the strain in the relationship between the commander and Serena, and which is quite interesting. I think we spoke about it in the characters video as well, but this society is supposed to be serving them, and yet they are going and they are resisting aspects or laws or rules of that society. And so really, who is the society working for if it's not even, you know, fulfilling or satisfying the commander and Serena? Memory, our happiness is part memory. All I can hope for is reconstruction. The way love feels is always only approximate. And this is, so all this memory, you know, we spoke about this in characters, in the character videos with Alfred. All these flashbacks, all these memories that she has are significant. They keep her going. They keep her motivated to survive, and they fuel her sense of passive resistance or resistance. Revolution and a new world order. I don't have those things anymore, the clothes and hair. I wonder what happened to all other things. Looted, dumped out, carried away, confiscated. So I think a theme that links to this is the idea of loss, because Alfred and all these different characters, they've lost any vestige of their old lives. And that's what's so significant about the relationship between Moira and Alfred, is it's something that transcends the takeover of power and this revolution. The limitations of power. For every rule, there is always an exception. This too can be depended on. Whatever is silenced will clamor to be heard, though silently. Behold, behind this particular door, taboo dissolved. And so this is also linked to the theme of resistance, the limitation of power. Power cannot triumph everything. You know, you can have the most shocking and restrictive regime, but you will still be there will still be a glimmer of resistance. No matter what happens, no matter how many shadows there are, there will still be that light. And we can see in the society that for every rule, there is an exception. So the commander breaks rules, Serena breaks rules, every single character breaks a rule at some point. Religion. Ordering prayers from soul scrolls is supposed to be a sign of piety. So that just shows the distortion of religion and Christianity, and the distortion of knowledge and the indoctrination. So if you just purchase some of these prayers from soul scrolls, then you know you are holy. You don't have to really do anything, and that's sort of the epitome of, you know, the distortion of a religion. Gender roles and the meaning and purpose of life. About looking at her body, Alfred says, I don't want to look at something that determines me so completely. That is such an interesting thing, because she has been completely dehumanized just to produce a child. That's her only fundamental, one and single only purpose in her life. And so looking at her body, she doesn't like it, because it's not something that she feels like she controls, because she really does not have control over her own, over herself and over her body. But also it's something that determines her so completely. So that's a really nice quote there. This is not recreation, even for the commander. This is serious business. The commander too is doing his duty. So this is talking about the ceremony, and it's talking about, like, Alfred's entire purpose in life is to produce a child for Commander Fred and for Serena Joy. The next theme is the dangers of humanity, and this is a lot of Aunt Lydia and Aunt Elizabeth. You are a transitional generation. They will accept their duty with willing hearts, because they will have no memories of any other way, because they won't want things they can't have. Here, Lydia is speaking to the women she is training at the Red Center to be handmaids, and this is really scary, and that's why I've labeled it as the dangers of humanity, because it's the power of humanity to indoctrinate and to make these, statements that she's basically saying that their daughters, that the next generation of handmaids will not know any better but the confinement with which they've been given. And so humanity, we have this incredible capacity to do a lot of good, but we also have a very dangerous side. The oppression of women and double standards. If I let the noise get out into the air, it will be laughter. Most of the stores carrying things for men are still open. It's just the ones dealing in what they call vanities that have been shut down. It's only the women who can't, who remain stubbornly closed, damaged, defective. The problem wasn't only with the women, he says. The problem was with the men. There was nothing for them anymore. Nature demands variety for men. It stands to reason. It's part of the procreational strategy. It's nature's plan. So this oppression of women and the double standards, very relevant in today's society as well. This line over here may not seem to fit into this, fit into anything really, but this is offered in her room, and she's scared to laugh, and I think that just really shows the oppression of, any sort of feeling or emotion that she's allowed to express. Speaking about the changeover, she says all of the women's stores, the ones that apparently only selling vanities, were shut down, but all the men's stores of the same variety are still open. And then a key thing with this is that it's never assumed to be the man's fault why the wife cannot be pregnant. It's always just the woman's fault. And obviously that leads to, Serena having to convince Offer to sleep with Nick, because there might be actually something wrong with the commander. It may not be Serena at all, but Serena is blamed for it, and that adds a little bit of a sympathetic element to her character, but it's always the women who can't, so it's always the women's problem. And the commander says these last two lines about the nature of men and women, and he says that women are suffering in the society, but men are really suffering in the society because there's no sort of desire for the women because of the new rules, which is deeply problematic to say that the men are suffering more than the women in Gileadan society. And then the last line, which is something very commonly heard but an extreme double standard, the idea that men need variety, they need to sleep with many women, and women are not the same like that. They have no sort of desire and they should not indulge in that. The next theme is very important: re-education and indoctrination, knowledge and its link to power. The Bible is kept locked up, so the servants wouldn't steal it. It is an incendiary device. Who knows what we'd make of it? The sin of reading. I knew they made that up. Sometimes you can find things out on birthdays. Moira was like an elevator with open sides. She made us dizzy. Already we were losing the taste for freedom. Already we were finding these walls secure. Books right out in plain view. No locks, no boxes. No wonder we can't come in here. It's an oasis of the forbidden. I was evil, but I didn't feel evil. So Offred's, she keeps her sanity, she keeps her memories, she shows us this through her flashbacks, but she still cannot deny the impact of indoctrination on her. So she, as much as she resists it and she does think of her past life and she finds comfort in that in some regard, she is still heavily indoctrinated, and we can see who the people she interacts with and how she positions herself to society, how she's supposed to behave. So knowledge is definitely linked to power. The Bible is kept locked up. The commander's office has all these books, and it's just fascinating to Offred. It hasn't seen them for so long, and she loves playing Scrabble because it's actually using her mind and it's using her knowledge and it's using some sort of skill which she's been deprived of for so long. The idea that knowledge can be incendiary, it can cause something major. I mean, this is obviously, if you think historically of, the advent of the printing press and how that changed knowledge forever, and it changed hierarchy forever because, in Gileadan society, we've sort of gone back to that hierarchical stage of not everyone has access to knowledge, so therefore the people with knowledge are powerful. I knew they made that up, so even the sense of these characters, they are aware that this is made up, but there's this element of fear that is so incredibly crippling that they can't do anything about it. And this line about Moira, I used it in the character of Moira as well, but I repeated it here because it's such a fascinating simile, because it speaks about how they envy Moira and they just look at her in such awe because of what she's able to do. She's able to resist with all this integrity and all of this passion. And Offred notes how her and the rest of the handmaids in training, we were already losing the taste for freedom. We were already finding these walls secure, meaning like this indoctrination was already getting to them and they were already becoming sort of complacent, and Moira was the only one sort of fighting against that. So you can see the power of indoctrination and re-education. Sorry, just before we move on to the next thing, you can also see this theme with regards to Janine and how she completely changes, and her horrific sort of presentation of her rape story at the Red Center, and also how she loses her sanity at the end of the novel. You can see her degradation due to this theme of indoctrination and re-education. Moving on to power versus powerlessness. To refuse to see him could be worse. There's no doubt who holds the real power. It's a bargaining session. Things are about to be exchanged. She who does not hesitate is lost. I'm not giving anything away. Selling only. Apologies for the typo there, in about. Now he's compromised himself. It's as if he's offered me drugs. After a request like that, there's always a next time, whether you say yes or no. So this is a key aspect if you want to prove that the relationship between the commander and Offred is sort of, it's non-real, it's fake, it's just a power play, because really there is the power versus the powerful versus the powerless, and Offred is clearly powerless with regard to her relationship with Serena and with the commander, and so anything that she does according to their wishes is not any form of resistance on her part. As much as she'll get into trouble with Serena if she goes and meets with the commander, she will get into maybe more trouble if she doesn't meet with the commander. So if you want to prove that, maybe she's not entirely resistant at all because she just has to follow, the things that she does against the rules, like sleeping with Nick and having this relationship with the commander, it's all because she is powerless. She has to listen, even though it might put her at a disadvantage and it might cause her to actually suffer in the long run and to deal with the consequences, whereas the others will not deal with them due to their status in society. Suffering, this links to the loss of humanity, talking about Moira's punishments. She could not walk for a week. It was the feet they do for the first offense. Apologies for the typo there. They didn't care what they did to your feet and hands, even if it was permanent. Pain marks you, but too deep to see. Then we have a very important theme. I keep saying that, but these are also quite significant. Sanity and the power of the mind. The mind is a site of resistance. The things I believe can't all be true. Sanity is a valuable possession. I hoard it the way people once hoarded money. I save it so I will have enough when the time comes. Otherwise, you live in the moment, which is not where I want to be, but that's where I am. There's no escaping it. Time's a trap. I'm caught in it. I would steel myself. I would pretend not to be present, not in the flesh. And this is the idea that I really want you to consider and to contemplate, is that Offred's mind is the site of her resistance, that the fact that she maintains her sanity and that she's able to resist the full overwhelming effect of the indoctrination, the fact that she's able to think critically in a society that has been trying to re-educate her not to think critically, not to think at all really, but just to be and just to exist. She lives in her imagination. It's a coping mechanism. Well, not necessarily her imagination, but in her memories and in her flashbacks. And I think that's a really significant theme. And it's one where, her resistance is not overt, it's covert. And a lot of it happens in her mind. She recognizes that she can't, all the things that she hears cannot actually be true. She is aware of her situation, and awareness is sort of the first step towards, awareness and understanding of your situation allows you not to just get, caught up in it. Control and the life or role of the handmaid. I am too important, too scarce for that. I am a natural resource, worthy vessel. I am leading a pampered life. The bell that measures time is ringing. Time here is measured by bells, as once in nunneries. The door has no lock. There are no razors. Hair must be long but covered. At testifying, it's safer to make things up than to say you have nothing to reveal. It was my own fault. I led them on. I deserved the pain. Each month I watch for blood, fearfully, for when it comes it means failure. I have failed once again to fulfill the expectation of others, which have become my own. This is supposed to signify that we are one flesh, one being. What it really means is that she is in control of the process and thus of the product. We are containers. It's only the insides of our bodies that are important. Usually we walked with our heads bent down, our eyes on our hands, and our eyes on our hands or the ground. I'm the vehicle for her hope. We are for breeding purposes. We are two-legged wombs. That's all. Sacred vessels. Long-sleeved even in the summer to keep us from the temptation of our own flesh. This rope segregates us, marks us off, keeps us from others, from contamination by us, makes for us a coral or pen, saved by childbearing. So lots of different things going on here, but it's talking about the role of the handmaid, and there's some wonderful quotes you can use there. Really nice and simple ones, not too many pronouns. This idea that there's sort of this irony because they are so important to society. They are this natural resource, they're the sacred vessel, but yet they're treated so poorly. They're treated as though they're not even human beings, that they're just this vessel, just this container. So there's a deep irony in that. The door has no lock and there are no razors because they've had such problems with handmaids committing suicide and trying to injure themselves to get out of this dreadful situation. This idea that their bodies must be covered, it's only the insides that count, this idea of resisting temptation, because an idealistic society, if you think about the idea of utopia or this idea of civilization, is that you are removed from desires because that's seen as somewhat animalistic. This idea that this is a really important part of the quote, obviously don't remember this entire quote because it's far too long, but this important part, I have failed once again to fulfill the expectation of others which have become my own. And that's also that idea is she's in control of the process and thus the product. So Offred's child will not be her child, it will be Serena's child, and she realizes that, and she realizes when she sees the blood, when she knows she's not pregnant, that she has failed in her duty, and in failing in her duty, she's failed in the duty of others and in the expectation of others. So this interwoven nature between the characters, that what one character does has an effect on the other character, is significant, but also it just shows that she is not even a human being herself. She's not treated as a human being with a life and with dreams of her own, or even a life of her own. She is the property of somebody else. So lots of different, these quotes are really good ones to take note of because they will come into play in literally any essay, no matter what the topic was. The inflexibility of roles versus the interchangeable nature of identity. In this house we all envy each other. So this is a bit of a deeper idea. It's not necessarily like that important, but it's quite significant that in the society we spoke about, everyone has their role and it's one role that is all consuming. But it's also, so there's like an inflexibility in that, but then also there's this interchangeable nature because these people remember a life before this complete transformation. So, there is this inflexibility and this is my role, this is what I must do, but there is that recollection of what they used to be before. Freedom. There is more than one kind of freedom, said Aunt Lydia. Freedom to and freedom from. In the days of anarchy, it was freedom to. Now you are being given freedom from. Don't underrate it. So this can definitely fall under the indoctrination one. This is one of my favorite quotes because it really shows the extent of re-education or doctoring a certain approach to life. And here she's trying to convince these women that they have this freedom from all these terrible things that women used to face in society. In the days of, she calls them the days of anarchy. In the past, women had freedom to do whatever they wanted, but now they have freedom from all of these terrible things that they are supposedly, by being handmaids or living in this Gileadian society, are protected from. So you can just see the levels of manipulation and distortion of reality. So here are another few themes to think about. Appearance versus reality. So that links to, Offred's character, how she appears to be versus what she's thinking in reality. resilience. So Offred is an extremely resilient character. Moira is resilient. So many different characters are resilient in their ambitions. They, well, not ambitions, but in their sort of will to survive and thrive in some way, shape, or form. Passive versus active resistance, we've discussed that a lot. Ambiguity, the unknown, and concealment. A lot of this novel is about these ambiguous ideas. The unknown, we don't know what happens to this character, we don't know what happens at this point in time, we don't even know certain people's names, we don't know Offred's real name. And that ambiguity leads to this sort of chaotic, or not necessarily chaotic, but this distorted version of reality that we're dealing with. The pursuit of progress and what human beings will do in order to attain progress, and progress in inverted commas. What does progress actually mean? What does a civilized, in inverted commas, society mean? What are we trying to produce, and how are we going about that process? What is this utopia that we're actually trying to create? Class and status and how this is decided. So obviously the reason why Offred is a handmaid is she married a divorced man. So thinking about the connotation of status, the connotation of class, how these things are decided, what the double standards are in terms of that decision, and ultimately going back right to the beginning, who does it benefit and why does it benefit them in that way? I hope that was helpful. Please remember to like and subscribe, and to check out the characters video on Handmaid's Tale, as well as the literature essay skills video and the how to integrate a quotes video. Thank you so much. See you in the next video.